Book of Heaven, Volume 2, Part 5. June 5th, 1899. The operating of Jesus is not hasty, but all in its time. The health of the confessor. My state of annihilation still continues, but such that I did not dare to say a word to my beloved Jesus. However, this morning, having compassion for my miserable state, he himself wanted to cheer me, and here is how. As he made himself seen, and I felt all annihilated and ashamed before him, Jesus drew near me, but so close that it seemed to me that he was in me, and I in him. And he told me, "My beloved daughter, what is wrong that you are so afflicted? Tell me everything, for I will content you, and will remedy everything." Since I continued to see myself the way I described above the other day, in seeing myself so bad, I did not even dare to tell him anything. But Jesus repeated, "Come, come, tell me what you want. Do not hesitate." Seeing myself almost forced, bursting into flooding tears, I said to him, "Holy Jesus, how do you want me not to be afflicted? After so many graces, I should no longer be so bad. Sometimes, even in the good works that I try to do, in the very prayers, I mix so many defects and imperfections that I myself feel horror. What must it be before you, who are so perfect and holy? And then the suffering, so very scarce compared to before, your long delays in coming. Everything tells me in clear notes that my sins, my awful ingratitudes are the cause of it, and that you, indignant with me, deny me also that daily bread, which you generally concede to everyone, which is the cross. So you will end up abandoning me completely. Can there perhaps be a greater affliction than this?" Jesus, all compassion for me, pressed me to his heart and told me, "Do not fear. This morning we will do things together. In this way I will make up for your things." So first it seemed that Jesus contained a font of water and another of blood within his breast, and in those two fountains he plunged my soul, first in the water and then in the blood. Who can say how purified and embellished my soul became? Then we began to pray together, reciting 3 glory bees, and he told me that he was doing this to make up for my prayers and adorations to the majesty of God. Oh, how beautiful and touching it was to pray together with Jesus. After this, Jesus told me, "Do not let yourself be afflicted by the lack of suffering. Do you want to anticipate the hour established by me? My operating is not hasty, but all in its time. We will accomplish everything, but at the appropriate time." Then afterwards, because of a fully providential circumstance, unexpectedly, since the viaticum had come out of the church for other sick people, I too received communion. Who can say afterwards everything that passed between me and Jesus? The kisses, the caresses that Jesus gave me. It is impossible to say everything. After communion, I seemed to see the sacred host, and in the host I could see now the mouth of Jesus, now his eyes, now one hand, and then he showed all of himself. He transported me outside of myself, and I found myself now in the vault of the heavens, now on earth in the midst of men, but always together with Jesus. Every now and then he would repeat, "Oh, how beautiful you are, my beloved. If you knew how much I love you, and you, how much do you love me?" On hearing these words being spoken to me, I experienced such confusion that I felt myself dying. But in spite of this, I had the courage to say to him, "Jesus, my beautiful one, yes, I love you very much. And you, if you really love me much, tell me also, do you forgive me for all the evil I have done? But concede also suffering to me." And Jesus, "Yes, I forgive you, and I want to content you by pouring in abundance my bitternesses into you." And so Jesus poured his bitternesses. It seemed to me that he had a fount of bitternesses in his heart, received by the offenses of men, and most of it he poured out into me. Then Jesus told me, "Tell me, what else do you want?" And I, "Holy Jesus, I recommend to you my confessor. Make him holy, and grant him also health of the body. And besides, is it fully your will for this Father to come?" And Jesus, "Yes." And I, "If it were your will, you would let him be well." And he, "Be quiet, do not want to investigate my judgments too much." At that very moment, he showed me the improvement in the health of the body and the sanctity of the soul of the confessor. And he added, "You want to be hasty, but I do everything at the right time." Then I recommended to him the people that belonged to me, and I prayed for sinners, saying to Jesus, "Oh, how I wish that my body would split into tiny little pieces, if only sinners would convert." And so I kissed the forehead, the eyes, the face, the mouth of Jesus, doing various adorations and reparations for the offenses that sinners gave him. Oh, how content Jesus was, and so was I. Then, having Jesus promise to me that he would not leave me any more, I came back into myself, and so it ended. June 8th, 1899. Few are those who have the good will to be saved. Bitternesses and sweetnesses. My adorable Jesus still continues to make himself seen all benignity and sweetness. This morning, while I was together with him, he repeated again, "Tell me, what do you want?" Immediately I said, "Jesus, my dear, what I would really want is that the whole world would convert." What a request out of the blue! But still my loving Jesus told me, "I would content you, if only everyone had the good will to be saved. Yet to show you that I would gladly grant everything you have said, let us go together into the midst of the world, and all those whom we will find with the good will to be saved, as evil as they might be, I will give to you." So we went out into the midst of the people to see who had the good will to be saved. But to our greatest disappointment, we found a number so very scarce that it is pitiful even just to think about it. In this number, so very scarce, there was my confessor, the majority of priests, and part of the faithful, but not everyone from Corrado. Then he showed me the various offenses he was receiving. I prayed him to let me share in his sufferings, and Jesus poured his bitternesses from his mouth into mine. After this he told me, "My daughter, I feel my mouth too embittered. Oh, please, I beg you to sweeten it." I said to him, "I would gladly give you anything, but I have nothing. You yourself tell me, what can I give you?" And he told me, "Let me suckle milk from your breasts, for in this way you will be able to sweeten me." And in the very act of saying this, he lay down in my arms and began to suckle. While he was doing this, a fear came to me that it might not be baby Jesus, but the devil. Therefore I placed my hand on his forehead, and I signed him with the cross, per signum crucis. Jesus looked at me all festive, and while still suckling, he smiled, and with his lively eyes he seemed to tell me, "I am not a demon. I am not a demon." After he seemed to be satiated, he got up, standing on my lap, and kissed me all over. Now, since I too felt my mouth bitter from the bitternesses he had poured into me, I felt the desire to suckle from the breasts of Jesus, but I did not dare to. But Jesus invited me to do it, and so I plucked up courage and I began to suckle. Oh, what sweetness of paradise came from that holy breast! But who can express it? Then I found myself inside myself, all inundated with sweetnesses and contentments. Now, I will explain that when it happens that Jesus suckles from my breasts, the body does not participate in this at all. Rather, it happens when I am outside of myself. It seems that this thing happens only between the soul and Jesus, and when he wants to do this, he is always a baby. It is so certain that it is only the soul and not the body, that when this happens, I always find myself either in the vault of the heavens or wandering through other points of the earth. Sometimes, then, I have said that, as I returned to myself, I felt a pain at that place from which baby Jesus had suckled, because in suckling, sometimes he would do it a little strongly, so much so that it seemed that through that suckling he wanted to pull out my heart from inside my breast. Therefore I felt a sensible pain, and as I would return to myself, the soul would communicate it to the body. Moreover, this happens also in other things, as for example, when the Lord transports me outside of myself and lets me share in the crucifixion. Jesus himself lays me on the cross and pierces my hands and feet through with the nails. I feel such pain that I feel myself dying. Then, when I find myself inside myself, I feel it well in my body, so much so as to be unable to move my fingers or my arm. And so with the other sufferings that the Lord shares with me. To say everything, I would be too long. I also remember that when Jesus would suckle from my breasts, he would place his mouth there, but it is from my heart that I would feel him draw whatever he suckled, so much so that while he would do this, at times I have felt my heart being torn from my breast, and sometimes, feeling a most vivid pain, I said to him, "My pretty little one, really, you are too impertinent. Do it more gently, for it hurts very much." And he would laugh to himself. In the same way, when I am the one suckling from Jesus, It is from his heart that I draw that milk or blood. So much so that, for me, suckling from the breast of Jesus is the same as drinking from his side. I will add also another thing. Since the Lord every now and then is pleased with pouring a most sweet milk from his mouth, or with letting me drink his most precious blood from his side, then, when he does this, of wanting to suckle from me, he suckles nothing else but what he himself has given me, because I have nothing with which to sweeten him, but much with which to embitter him. This is so true that sometimes in the very act in which he suckled from me, I suckled from Jesus, and I perceived clearly that what he was drawing from me was nothing other than what he himself was giving me. It seems that I have explained myself enough, as much as I could. June 9th, 1899. Offenses and dishonesties of men. Union of sufferings and of prayers. I spent this morning very anguished because of the many offenses which I saw him receive from men, especially because of certain horrendous dishonesties. How much the loss of souls grieved Jesus! More so since it was a newborn baby that they were going to kill, without administering holy baptism to him. It seems to me that this sin weighs so much on the scale of divine justice that it is the one that most cries out for revenge before God. Yet these sorrowful scenes are renewed so very often. My most sweet Jesus was so afflicted as to arouse pity. Seeing him in such a state, I did not dare to tell him anything, and Jesus only said to me, "My daughter, unite your sufferings to mine, your prayers to mine, so that they may be more acceptable before the majesty of God, and may appear not as your things, but as my own works." Then he continued to make himself seen other times, but always in silence. May the Lord be always blessed. June 11th, 1899. Light in order to comprehend Luisa. My sweet Jesus continues to make himself seen only very few times, and almost always in silence. I felt my mind all confused, and full of fear that I might lose my sole and only good, and about many other things, which is not necessary to say here. Oh God, what pain! While I was in this state, he made himself seen for just a little. He seemed to carry a light, and from that light many other little globes of light were coming out. Jesus told me, "Remove every fear from your heart. See, I have brought you this globe of light to place it between you and me, and among those who approach you. For those who approach you with an upright heart and to do good to you, these little globes of light that come out will penetrate into their minds, will descend into their hearts, will fill them with joy and with celestial graces, and they will comprehend with clarity that which I operate in you. Those, then, who will come with other intentions will experience the opposite, and will remain dazzled and confused by these little globes of light." So I remained more tranquil. May everything be for the glory of God. June 12th, 1899. Jesus himself prepares her for communion. This morning, having to receive communion, I was praying good Jesus to come to prepare me himself before the confessor would come to celebrate Holy Mass. Otherwise, how can I receive you, being so bad and not disposed? While I was doing this, my Jesus was pleased to come, and in the very act of seeing him, it seemed to me that he did nothing but dart through me with his gazes, most pure and sparkling with light. Who can say what those penetrating gazes operated in me, letting not even the shadow of a tiny speck escape? It is impossible to be able to say it. Rather, I would have wanted to let all this pass in silence, because the internal operations of grace can hardly be expressed with one's mouth just as they are. Rather, it seems that one would counterfeit them. But Lady Obedience does not want it, and when it is for her, one must close one's eyes and surrender without saying anything else. Otherwise, troubles everywhere. In fact, being a lady, of her own she makes herself be respected. Therefore I continue telling. In the first gaze, I prayed Jesus to purify me, and so it seemed to me that everything that shadowed my soul was shaken off of it. In the second gaze, I prayed him to illumine me, because what good comes to a precious stone from being pure, if it is not sparkling so as to capture the gaze of those who look at it? They will look at it, yes, but with an indifferent eye. Much more was I in need of that light, which would not only render my soul resplendent, but would make me understand the great action I was about to do, since I was not only to be looked at, but identified with my sweet Jesus. Therefore it was not enough for me to be purged, but also illumined. So in that gaze, Jesus seemed to penetrate through me, just as the light of the sun penetrates through crystal. After this, seeing that Jesus continued to look at me, I said to him, "Most loving Jesus, since you were pleased to purge me first, and then to illumine me, be so kind now as to sanctify me. More so since, having to receive you, who are the Holy of Holies, it is not right that I be so different from you." So always benign toward this miserable one, Jesus leaned toward me, took my soul in his arms, and seemed to retouch it all over with his own hands. Who can say what those touches of those creative hands operated in me? How my passions, at those touches, put themselves in their place. My desires, inclinations, affections, heartbeats, and my other senses, sanctified by those divine touches, changed into something wholly other, and united among themselves, no longer clashing as before, formed a sweet harmony for the hearing of my dear Jesus. It seemed to me that they were like many rays of light, which wounded his adorable heart. Oh, how Jesus amused himself, and what happy moments those have been for me. I experienced the peace of the saints. It was for me a paradise of contentments and of delights. After this, Jesus seemed to clothe my soul with the garment of faith, of hope, and of charity, and in the very act of clothing me, Jesus whispered to me the way I was to exercise myself in these three virtues. Now, while I was doing this, unleashing another ray of light, Jesus made me understand my nothingness. I seemed to be like a grain of sand in the middle of a most extensive sea, which is God. and this little grain went to disperse itself inside that immense sea, but it was lost in God. Then he transported me outside of myself, carrying me in his arms, and kept whispering to me various acts of contrition for my sins. I only remember that I have been an abyss of iniquities. Lord, oh, how many awful ingratitudes I have had toward you. While I was doing this, I looked at Jesus. He had the crown of thorns on his head. I stretched out my hand, and I removed it from him, telling him, "Give the thorns to me, O Jesus, for I am a sinner. The thorns befit me, not you, who are the just one, the Holy One." So Jesus himself drove it onto my head. Then, I don't know how, I saw the confessor from afar. Immediately I prayed Jesus to go to prepare the confessor to be able to receive him at communion, and Jesus seemed to go to Father. After a little while, he came back and told me, "I want the way you deal with me and with the confessor to be one, and I want the same from him. He must look at you and deal with you as if you were another me, because since you are victim as I was, I want no difference at all. And this, so that everything may be purged, and my love alone may shine in everything." I said to him, "Lord, this seems impossible, that I may be able to deal with the confessor as one does with you, especially in seeing the instability." And Jesus, "Yet it is so. True virtue, true love, makes everything disappear, destroys everything, and with an enchanting mastery makes God alone shine in all its operating, and it looks at everything in God." After this, the confessor came to call me to obedience, and then celebrate Holy Mass. And so it ended. Then I listened to Holy Mass, and I received communion. Now, who can say the intimacy that passed between me and Jesus? It is impossible to be able to manifest it. I have no words to make myself understood. Therefore, I let it pass in silence. June 14th, 1899. Jesus wants to chastise the world. This morning, most loving Jesus was not coming. In my interior, I kept thinking, how is it that he is not coming? What is new? Yesterday he came so often, and today the hour is getting late, and he has not even showed himself yet. What heartbreak! What patience it takes with Jesus! It seemed to me that my whole interior was becoming all alarmed, for it wanted Jesus, and it waged such a war against me as to give me pains of death. My will, as though superior to everything, tried to bring peace by persuading my senses, inclinations, desires, affections, and all the rest to calm down, for Jesus would come. So after long suffering, Jesus came, carrying a cup in his hand, full of blood, coagulated, putrefied, and stinking. And he told me, "Do you see this cup of blood? I will pour it over the world." While he was saying this, Mamma came, the Most Holy Virgin, and my confessor together with her. They prayed Jesus not to pour it over the world, but to have me drink it. The confessor said to him, Lord, why keep her as victim if you do not want to pour it over her? I absolutely want you to let her suffer and to spare the people. Mamma was crying and insisted with Jesus and with the confessor that he should not give up praying until Jesus would be content with accepting the exchange. Jesus insisted that he wanted to pour it over the whole world, and at first he almost seemed to frown. I saw myself all confused. I was unable to say anything, because the sight of that cup full of blood so ugly was so horrifying as to cause my whole nature to tremble. What would it be to drink it? However, I was resigned. If the Lord would give it to me, I would accept it. Who can say then the chastisements contained in that blood, if the Lord would pour it over the world? It seems that from this very day he keeps the hail prepared which will cause great damage, and it seems that it must continue in the following days. Then later on, Jesus seemed a little bit more calm, so much so that he seemed to embrace the confessor, because he had prayed him in that way, however, without coming to any determination on whether he would pour it over the people or not. So it ended, leaving me an indescribable pain because of what may happen. You have reached the end of the Book of Heaven, Volume 2, Part 5. Fiat.